Now, it's time for the Anchormen podcast with Matt Gaetz and Dan Ball.
Welcome back to Anchormen. We are going to do a deep dive episode into some of the issues facing the Trump administration on the economic front and on the cultural front that relate to China and the reckoning the United States is having. I've got a tremendous expert with me who's got a really, really great book out on the subject. But I want to tell you why we're talking about this. We got into this first 100 days of the Trump administration, and the core promise that Trump made was that he was going to secure the border. This won him the election. And he doesn't get enough credit. We don't talk about that enough, but he does the thing on the border. You see a border that is very well orderly and maintained at this stage of the game. And then Trump turns his attention to the economy. And what he's got to do is he's got to get his bill passed. Now, you could quibble with his bill. You can have issues with the spending level. But at the end of the day, the bill achieved a number of Herculean successes with the majorities we have. He gets his tax cuts extended. He fulfills his campaign promises on no tax on tips, gives seniors a big rebate to offset taxes on Social Security. And he's able to do all of this while fighting a multi-dimensional trade war that the United States has largely surrendered prior to Donald Trump's ascent to the presidency. And so Trump gets that done. And now, with the bill in hand, I think that the relationship between the United States and China is the number one thing that is going to shape our economic prospects probably over the next 5 to 10 years, but maybe even over the next 5 to 10 months. And for people looking at the midterm elections, nothing could be more important on how China is making their moves, why they're making the moves they're making right now. And that's why I brought on the program Chris Fenton. He's got this great book, Feeding the Dragon: Inside the $1 Trillion Dilemma Facing Hollywood, the NBA, and American Business. And what I would say is it's almost the modern day answer to Kissinger's book on China, because Kissinger makes this argument that it all is going to be rosy if we bring China close to us. They'll be just like us. There'll be a McDonald's on every corner, and this will lead to a democratized capitalism that will encircle Russia, in fact, with China on our side. But what you write about is a corporate class in our country that has been seduced by China. And they have been seduced by China's market, by their productive sectors, and it doesn't always lead to good things. So, Chris Fenton, we're joined as always by my good friend and occasional coworker, Vish Burra. Vish, thanks as always. You're playing the part of the homeless guy this week. No, I'm kidding. Yes. He was great. No, we love Jackie. But Chris, tell me why you wrote the book and how corporate America and the United States are feeding the dragon.
Well, thanks for having me. I love the show. And if you talk about seduction, all of us in the U.S.-China trade, since Kissinger and Nixon first got there in 1971, have been seduced by the idea if we help open that market as much as we can, no matter what it took, to our products and services that we make here in the U.S., we would spread the aspirational qualities of democracy in that country, and we would essentially create revenue streams from a market that we never had open that would build our GDP and grow jobs here in the U.S. And that was like a higher calling that a lot of us had. I mean, don't get me wrong. There was a very lucrative opportunity when it came to moving your career into that trade, that bilateral dynamic. But at the same token, it was really nice to know that we were essentially opening up this market. We were opening up minds in that market to the idea that maybe democracy was a better system of government than what they had. And it felt like we were actually doing something for the greater good of the United States of America. Except at some point, we all ended up getting that smack in the nose moment. And I call it the smack in the nose because Matt Pottinger talks about how it happened to him in the early 2000s. Unfortunately, to me, it really didn't happen until later in 2019 when the NBA got in a lot of hot water for something that Daryl Morey tweeted. And we can get into that.
Yeah.
But it's a fascinating story.
No, I want to get into the sports angle, but before we look at the different vectors, let's start with a high level. You're China right now. What do you think their goals are as they see the world today and as they see the posture the Trump administration has taken?
Well, it's interesting because, I mean, the beauty of what Trump did in his first term was that he pulled the fire alarm on the China issue, right? No one was really willing to talk.
It wasn't
about
even an issue.
It wasn't an issue. All of us knew there was something awry and it wasn't quite going the way we expected, but we all kept our head down for that greater good, that greater mission, that greater purpose. And it was him, guys like Matt Pottinger, Robert Lighthizer, Peter Navarro, they all got behind this idea that, hey, we got to change the course here because it's going really wrong. And if we don't fix it, it's going to be too late. So that was the fire alarm that occurred. And then if you look at, I think, and this is where I'll differ from our mutual friend Steve Bannon, where I don't think China's goal is to overtake the world and be the world leader. I think they've realized that that can end empires pretty quickly. What they really want to do is be the regional power. But the part that's really scary is the fact that they have a scarcity of resources there. Energy, food, water, minerals, you name it, they can't harvest enough to satisfy 1.4 billion people inside their borders. And that's where we're seeing that Belt and Road Initiative. We're seeing fishermen off the coast of China or off the coast of Chile or Madagascar. We're seeing all kinds of reach into the Arctic region.
But wait, doesn't that mean that they don't want to be a regional power? If you want to extract resources from a Honduran jungle, if you want to fish off the waters of Chile, doesn't that mean you have to have an ability to make things happen globally?
That's a good point. But I think actually all they care about is that self-serving interest of taking care of their 1.4 billion people.
So it's true colonial. It's kind of less like China doesn't care what Chile's values are in a way that American colonialism kind of does now. We have this values-based colonial. We want to colonize you with our Pride Month and our pronouns and whatever else. Whereas China simply wants to get back to just like good old-fashioned resource-based colonialization. Is that how we should think about it?
Yeah, I think it's a real self-interest and the idea that the more you spread yourself thin, the more apt you are to lose power and lose influence. So they know that they have 1.4 billion people they got to satisfy. They got to make them just happy enough that they don't revolt. They don't want another Tiananmen Square. So how do you do that? You provide just enough of what they need and this aspiration that they can get a little more of what they want within the system that is the best in the world. And that's why, and we'll talk about Hollywood and soft power influence, but the fact is their goal is to make sure that their people think their system is the best in the world, and the system of democracy or the republic that we are here in the United States of America is the wrong system and it won't support what their needs are. So give us the power, give us the standing committee, which, by the way, Xi Jinping has brought down to just a single-digit amount from what it used to be. You got 92 million CCP members there now. They're all embedded in all of the different sectors of the economy, and that is the system that they want their people to believe in.
What you've said, I think, is so poignant, and I think a lot of people in Washington in the policymaking space miss it. China pitches alongside their bribes reliability as a governance model. They say we are a more reliable partner than the Americans. Think what you want about Trump or Biden, it changes too much. Whereas like we are at least steady Eddie on the global stage. And you said it far better than I did, but understanding that that's part of their pitch is so important, and I think not a lot of our policymakers do. So you write about China's influence in Hollywood, the NBA, and in corporate America. Where do you think it is highest among those three?
Well, I think if you look at the art of war and the way they look at the ability to essentially get what they want around the world without ever firing a bullet, a lot of that has to do with influence. So I would say the power that they saw with Hollywood and being able to tap into that soft power propaganda was crucial to them, because I'll use a perfect example. I mean, I'm 54. I grew up in the 80s. Everything I thought about when it came to the Soviet Union was what Hollywood and our geopolitical complex here in the United States wanted us to visualize the Soviet Union as. Drab, never sunny, always raining.
Ivan
spies.
Drago at times.
Yes. I mean, Gorky Park. You never saw a movie that portrayed Russia with blue skies and gleaming skyscrapers and happy people. It was always dreary. It was always drab. But when China started to get its tentacles into Hollywood, not only because they had a market that Hollywood coveted, but they also were bringing money investing in Hollywood, they immediately said to Hollywood, you can't show crime. You can't show things that are bad about our system, only good things. You can only show our gleaming infrastructure, our high rises, our technology advanced cities. People.
Yeah, like the last time there was like a gritty, crimey scene, like with a Chinese feature. I think it was like the opening scene of an Indiana Jones movie.
Yeah, and they got in a lot of trouble for that one too, right?
Right.
I mean,
So you think that was the key? Because Vish, you talk about this a lot, how the actually culture is upstream of politics and policy making.
Yes.
And it seems like what Chris is saying is that China understood that in film.
Yes.
And injected it. How would you rate the success of it, of that project on China's part?
I think that it's been very successful. I mean, I thought, when I watched Maverick, the Top Gun movie, and they had this nameless country with this base, and they were talking about fifth gen, fighters and all this stuff. I thought that this was maybe the closest that Hollywood ever get to portraying China as the enemy. But it turns out actually it was kind of more like Iran.
Yeah, it actually came true.
Yeah,
the plot of the movie Maverick came true.
Right, and that's another part I want to get into. But that was when I thought maybe it came closest. But you don't really see any portrayals of China in this manner where it's like adversarial. Whereas Chernobyl, the HBO series, when it shows Russia and the Soviet Union, to this day it's still gray. The gray tones on the shot, and everything's drab, and every place looks like a 1900s hospital or something like that. You still see that today. So I think obviously China understood this and is excelling it, not because of what you see, but what you don't see.
Well, what about Bond movies or Born Identity movies or whatever? They're never going to have China infiltrating the Taiwan airspace with a WMD or whatever, like that's going to blow up from a hot air balloon or whatever it is, right?
But you're just saying China bought that.
They 100% bought it. You can't.
Is that for sale for everyone, by the way? Like if the Saudis, if the Emiratis, whomever wants to come in and just buy that type of Hollywood soft power, if China bought it, why can't anyone buy it?
Well, the beauty, and I've worked in the Middle East too, and the Middle East has a lot of money, a lot of investment dollars, but they don't have a market, right? You have a two-way street of money when it comes to China, both from what you can get from that market as far as consumers, but then what you can get from that market as far as investors. And that is something that the Saudis will never have. I mean, Saudis have 30 million people. That's it. And most of them are tribal or immigrants from somewhere else building things or whatever. There's not a lot of money it's a very market.
That's fascinating. The value proposition in China is that it's the market lashed to the investment, and that you don't get that with the rich Gulf monarchies. So if that was the Hollywood play, let's talk about the NBA. I've talked about this on pods before, the hypocrisy of the NBA on China. How do you see it?
Well, that was my smack in the nose moment, because I just come back from taking some of your colleagues from Congress over there. I hosted congressional delegations, and it was the end of
China
in 2019. Yeah, I'm a board member with the U.S. Asian Institute, so we had Dina Titus, Fitzpatrick from Arizona, and Lowenthal here from California. We went over to see the Hong Kong protests. We were in Beijing, Chengdu, Xi'an, and Macau. And I just got back, and Daryl Morey tweeted that thing out. I wasn't even on Twitter. Somebody showed it to me on the sideline of a kid's soccer game that I was at, and it said, "Fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong." And I looked at it, and I was like, I don't know who Daryl Morey is. And then I looked him up, and I was like, oh, my God, he's the GM of the Houston Rockets. And somebody was like, is that a big deal? And I go, yeah, it's Yao Ming. It's the Houston Rockets. They mean everything in China.
Yeah.
That is going to crush the NBA. And somebody was like, really? A tweet? And I go, trust me. And literally within days, that thing blew out of like any sort of proportion we expected. And I was sitting there going, well, I guess I know China pretty well because I predicted that. But what got me with that smack in the nose was the fumbling and bumbling that Adam Silver and the NBA had in terms of how to respond to it, right? We're a First Amendment country. Daryl, I believe, tweeted that in Japan. He wasn't even in China. it seemed pretty obvious we were supposed to get behind Daryl Morey, but they didn't. And then they did, and then they didn't. And then LeBron James, who was in Shanghai, comes back on the tarmac at JFK and fumbled and bumbled with a response. And I'm sitting there going, wait, doesn't this guy have access to every PR exec there is to try to come up with what to say when you land? And he didn't. It was crazy. So that was the moment where I go, wait a minute, maybe I've been complicit in 2 decades of this crap because I've been standing up for things that probably weren't all that American, just trying to get more products and services in that country. And that was the moment where I go, wait a minute, we've all been doing this really wrong for a long time.
What about the Nets owner, the Alibaba CEO? Does that showcase another troubling Chinese invasion into kind of the athletics corporate space?
Well, first of all, Joe Tsai is a big benefactor of the sport of lacrosse, and I'm a big lacrosse fan. So it's a little tough to talk about it.
Oh, yeah.
But I will
white
say,
people will defend lacrosse. We will defend lacrosse. We are not giving up lacrosse. It's one of the last places we could send our children with a competitive
no, but Joe Tsai
shot.
did create a massive conflict of interest for the NBA, also for his team in that whole thing. And that was a real problem when it came for the NBA to really stand up for what we all wanted them to stand up for, but realized how much money was on the line not to do it.
Joe Tsai has blocked me on X. Did you know this? He blocked Joe Tsai. Unblock me, man. You're friends with a lot of my friends. You host a lot of Republicans at your games, but you have blocked me because during the COVID pandemic, he was all up in arms at Kyrie for not taking the vax, and I was Team Kyrie.
I was Team Kyrie too, but that's it. Kind of again, it just shows you like these markets that they're infiltrating, right? Like the Brooklyn, he goes and gets the Brooklyn Nets, right, and like that. And why would you do that? Well, there's actually a massive Chinese population in Brooklyn too, and obviously New York placement. Lots of visibility. That's going to play well back in China. And so,
but is it wrong that you let the owner of the guy that owns Alibaba or the CEO come and buy an NBA team?
I mean,
is that cool with you?
By the way, he's pretty much bought Yale University.
Well, by the way, hold it.
Well, I'm definitely more okay with that.
By the way, who were the owners of the Nets before that? Russian oligarchs.
That's right. That's right.
So I mean, so we're as far as I'm concerned,
the oligarchization of the Brooklyn Nets had already occurred.
Yeah, it already had occurred. So I don't want to I mean, I would rather neither, right? I'd rather an American owner, but this is how the system was. And again, like you said, most people didn't even really notice until about when Trump started really putting this thing out in the open, out front, and then things like when it got cultural, right? When it got when it got to the NBA and the Houston Rockets owner tweet and LeBron, essentially saying, the Houston Rockets owner should mind his own business or something to that effect, right? So and people didn't really realize it until now. So
well, the ballsiest move though in all of it was like eventually the NBA did get essentially Daryl Morey removed from the Houston Rockets. It took a while, and there was a lot of pressure in China to do that. And what happened? Because Daryl Morey's really good at what he does. I mean, really good. The Sixers just went and hired him and like, game on, let's go.
Yeah.
And they did not care one bit about China. And that was a really ballsy.
City of the Liberty Bell.
I love that.
What you tapped into, though, was the fear that the self-censorship really that occurred from the NBA. It wasn't like China was sending out messages from their ambassador about this or seeking some like full frontal confrontation with the United States over it. It was the legitimate fear on the part of the NBA that, oh my gosh, if we make them mad, then maybe we can't sell as much merch there.
It wasn't fear. It wasn't fear at all.
Okay, tell me about it.
They took them off the air.
Okay.
They canceled all the airings of everything that happened. They were
that
off the air
occurred
for
then?
Immediately.
Oh, wow.
Then
I
on
didn't
top
know
of
that.
it, any Chinese partner that they had on the brand merchandise, marketing side was told, get lost, do not touch the NBA. And then for a long time,
It was like a warning plan before COVID.
Dude, and imagine you're talking about Hollywood talking about, I got, possibly 1 billion viewers that I'm losing out in that market. Imagine 1 billion less shoe sales, right? Like that also happening. Yeah, no, definitely. I could see it the NBA.
well, not only that, we created the CBA, which is the NBA in China, which is allowed to have a couple of our players over there play on all those teams. They learned the process and the way to run a league really well. So the second they took the NBA off, they put a lot of effort into building the CBA. Now the CBA is a huge competitor to the NBA over there. So
Really?
that's what
Brand
happens.
parity?
Yeah, and then that's the same, and you still look at, okay, our market isn't that big for Hollywood in China now for a particular movie. I mean, we went from like 80 cents on every dollar made over there was a Hollywood film. Now we're down to about 5 cents on every dollar, so it's gotten crushed. But you still have Disney over there with one of the largest theme parks in the world in Shanghai. It's 57% owned by the Chinese government, but Disney's got a lot riding on that market and on that theme park. And then Universal built a huge one up in Beijing. They only own 30% of it, 70% owned by Beijing, but they got to make sure that thing works.
Disney's choosing whether to invest in Florida or China, and they're like, we're going where we face less draconian challenge from the executive.
That's so good. But that expansion by all like you said, Universal and Disney like that. Well, what can we do though about this? Do these execs have any incentive to try to kind of sever that relationship? If you're saying only 5 cents on the dollar is coming from China these days in their movies, like why even bother?
Well, there's the promise that it could open up again for our stuff. There's always that golden goose that could start to spread its wings again. So there's that hope. And then on top of it, you have massive consumer products businesses that these studios have, the theme parks and various other things. So there's still a lot of money riding on it. Where we need to all just start to focus, and it's really simple, is just think about patriotism before capitalism. That's all, right? If we're American companies and we've been born and raised here and we have certain values and principles that we need to hold dearly, or they get commandeered by a country that's not like ours, that's a problem. So we should have engagement with that market, but we just need to think about this reckless form of capitalism that we had for so many years. We need to abate, and we need to start putting our principles ahead of it.
Chris, if in New York someone walks into their board and says we've made a decision to not access the Chinese investment, capital markets or consumer markets, and we've done so on the basis of patriotism, that board would have that CEO on cleaning out their desk before the bagels arrived for the morning coffee.
That's if they don't throw them out the 80th
The
floor
interesting
window.
part is that China's doing it for them right now. I mean, we are getting weaned out of there slowly but surely. So everybody's starting to notice that. And then there's good messaging for Western consumers when you start to say, hey, there's certain things that we did with that market that we're not happy we did. We're going to change the course. And you can actually look like, hey, you're taking the higher road, you're doing the right thing, and you could probably amplify what you're doing in various markets while knowing you're already losing the China market anyway, whether you do it or not. So I think there are ways to straddle that are realistic and practical. Trust me, I've been in the private sector my whole life. I get where those issues are, but there's an opportunity now to do the right thing.
I could be wrong about this, but I would probably bet, perhaps naively, that it would be the market forces there, like on China's impact on the market from their government side, that would force that more than this organic immersion of corporate patriotism.
That's 100% the case, right? It's always about the dollar. But what I'm saying is that the dollar lost in China could be made up elsewhere by looking like you're doing the right thing and using the right narrative and messaging in your marketing and promotion in those other markets. So I do think we're seeing a little bit of a tipping point occur here, which is going to help. Okay.
Given your experience in these areas, if you're sitting there across the table from Trump right now as he's devising his strategy in these trade talks, and the talks with China are the most dispositive trade talks without a question, what are you telling him to do? What tactics, what key levers or pressure points would you focus on?
Well, I think they're already doing this really well. And by the way, I'd love to be a part of those just to hear what's happening and throw in my 2 cents just from my point of view of 25 years.
A lot of them listen to this show, so you're talking to them.
But the choke points are crucial to know in the supply chain. And we have ones that we've known were issues since probably 2008, 2010, which rare earths are the big ones, right?
Trump seems to know that.
Yeah, he 100% knows that, and he knows that their choke point is semiconductors, the chips, right? So we're trying to essentially use the game of chess against each other. And I think we do have the pressure points that are going to allow us to maintain the supply chain areas that we need to focus on and still get a supply from China, while they're going to still get what we need. But we have to put forward an industrial strategy that gets us off of that teat as quickly as possible.
That is so critically important. Like I cannot tell you the number of briefings I got on the Armed Services Committee where I'd be complaining about weapon system X or Y and not getting parts enough and not having enough of them operationally capable, whatever it is. And you get, behind closed doors and you start really pulling, why is this deficiency? And so much of like the base core material we need for the stuff for our military is part of the Chinese supply chain, or they have such influence on those markets that they can put one of your domestic subcontractors in a real jam by like screwing with a cobalt mine in Africa, or impacting where tungsten is coming from.
Well, their foreign minister Wang Yi actually spilled the beans openly, which was really surprising, about their desire to have the Russian-Ukraine conflict continue as long as possible.
Totally.
When you realize our F-35s hold 50 pounds of samarium cobalt magnets inside of them, you realize why they want that to continue, right? If you extrapolate that to various other military components that we're shipping over to Ukraine and that NATO is using in Ukraine to keep that war going, we're losing a lot of that resource to that war, and we don't have the production capabilities to replace it. China knows that. So the weaker we get because of these wars that are prolonged, the stronger their leverage gets. And quite frankly, the more war weary we get here in the U.S., so that if they ever do, quote, reunify Taiwan, I don't think the American public is going to care enough to try to push us into that war and try to protect Taiwan.
I certainly hope nobody on this set cares enough. And it's not that I don't care about Taiwan. I just simply think it's easier to import Taiwan to Arizona than to go fight an away game over an island right off the coast of China against the most sophisticated anti-aircraft weapon systems that we don't own.
Yeah, it's not like it's Catalina right offshore either.
Right.
I mean,
you're playing an away game for something you could definitely just import otherwise. And how many Americans should have to go die because of what flag flies over Taiwan, which, by the way, is already basically controlled by China anyway. No. I mean, the Taiwanese government and the Taiwanese military has been so infiltrated by China. I think that is a red herring. Oftentimes, they're like, we have to defend Taiwan, make Taiwan a porcupine. All of that is just a veneer to justify higher top lines for the defense industrial complex.
Well, your former colleagues, Gallagher and Krishnamurthy, they ran how many war games trying to see if there was a way to actually defend Taiwan without losing?
Right.
I don't think a single war game came up in our favor.
No, I mean, I know how the ones that are classified come out, but what I could tell you is that it didn't surprise me a lick when I saw that all the ones that they'd done publicly showcased that we could never get enough materiel into the fight. You know why? China can hit a moving target with a hypersonic weapon and we cannot. And that really reshapes how you think about deterrence and getting materiel across the Pacific Ocean. So,
and is there any desire of the regional allies that we have over there to jump in the middle of that too? I mean, Japan,
or do they get attacked? I mean, there's a world in which they get preemptively attacked. But your thesis at the beginning of this discussion was China actually doesn't want that. They want to be able to dominate their sandbox and to continue to make it a little bit bigger each and every day. But this notion that they are bloodlusting for some like kinetic conflict, or as our friend Steve calls it, unrestricted warfare, you're not as bought in on that. I do want to talk to you a little bit about TikTok, because so many young people resent the fact that Gen Xers and boomers who aren't on TikTok are lecturing them about the dangers of the platform. I'm not on TikTok. Maybe I will be one day. I don't know. I don't think you are. But I've had a lot of young people be like, well, let me get this straight, Matt. I got kicked off of Twitter for saying that vaccines could give you side effects. I got like thrown in Facebook jail because I said build the wall and then I supported the Second Amendment. But what you're really telling me is it's the Chinese I have to worry about. Like the American tech oligarchs have actually done worse to me. Now, I know behind that there's a whole data collection and there's a really sinister operational capability that comes out of what China is doing. But do you at least get how like Gen Z looks at this and sees a lot of being patronized?
I can see. Look, if somebody wanted to take Twitter away from me, I'd be upset about it too. But the fact of the matter is, Twitter is not run by one of our 4 foreign adversaries as defined by the U.S. government. Imagine if TikTok were run by North Korea or run by Iran or run by Russia. I think we would all look at it a different way, right? But for some reason,
but they would say, like, but Saudi and Saudi hacks up journalists and they own a bunch of Twitter, and Qatar is like the home base of Hamas and they own part of Twitter. So why shouldn't we be worried about that?
Well, because at least they're not designated as foreign adversaries, right? Number one. But number two is they don't own and control it and are looking to essentially the reality is, and I've been on TikTok because I want to talk about it and know a lot about it.
Yeah.
Twitter is really interesting the way that I actually get frustrated because my feed feeds me too much of what it thinks I want to read, and I always have to go try to proactively find other voices to hear like other parts of the equation because I don't like confirmation bias. I like to get all sides of it. TikTok is that on steroids times 1,000, right? It's almost impossible to find other points of view. So,
okay, but if the critique is a critique of like the algorithm being bad, one would say, well, then fine, apply that critique domestically.
Right, except domestically, we're not trying to.
I mean, we got a lot of fat people who shouldn't have Uber Eats.
Right, but China wants to divide us 100%. The more divided we are, the weaker we are.
But DoorDash wants to play into our gluttony. Like I could argue that every single app that exists is there to feed one of our vices, right? Tinder, lust, Uber Eats, and DoorDash gluttony. Probably TikTok is like some form of vanity or pride. And so like all of these things do that. They're all bad, but people resent the isolated attacks on TikTok and China because they don't feel a threat.
Let's go to Brendan Carr and the FCC and say, hey, if China wants to buy ABC, NBC, Fox, they can go buy it and own our networks, right? There's a reason why we don't allow that.
Well, I mean, yeah, but one and again, someone's going to clip these clips up and they're going to be terrible because they're going to be me saying things as straw man arguments here, enjoying my discussion with Chris. But what if the people would say, well, look, ABC, NBC, they're owned by like terrible Americans who censor us. What do we care if it's terrible Chinese who censor us or terrible Americans?
I think it's just how you define. Look, there's terrible Americans. Obviously, we can't say all citizens are fantastic, but I will say that there are things that we should protect as far as a sovereign nation under God. That's a nation that we're supposed to be proud of and be okay with the fact that we're essentially in control of our own destiny. Why are we allowing the largest source of news and information by people under 40, a platform that is supplying that under 40 to be controlled by a foreign adversary? That doesn't make any sense to me. That's, I guess if you're a complete globalist and you said there's no borders and we don't care who's involved with anything that's influencing us or pushing us in directions.
Well, if you were a fatalist to globalism, maybe if you weren't a globalist in your heart, but if you surveyed the landscape and said, you know what, everything has been globalized. Our labor markets have been globalized. Our information flow has been globalized. Hell, our elections have been globalized. I'm sure you've got thoughts on how how China is influencing our elections well beyond even just the core pillars of the book. And that is the way of the world. And so you can be naive about it and you could try to build little walls around turf. But at the end of the day, they get deconstructed because China develops another app that you don't know that they control. Like, remember when people were worried about TikTok going down? All those other crazy Chinese apps got millions of followers because people were voting with their feet. And so, like, I actually think the most compelling argument against TikTok is no one else, and you touched on it, no one else uses the data this way. Right? You could say what you want about Twitter and Facebook and all the problems they've had, but none of them are like centralizing the data and then using similar faces and then sending fake IDs into the country so that 30,000 people can vote. They like weren't supposed to be voting in our elections. And the use of the data is really what makes TikTok worthy of that type of attack.
Well, there's two sides. I mean, national security interests and experts that look at the TikTok issue do seem to be divided a little bit of, is it the data that's the big national security issue, or is it the propaganda from a foreign adversary?
Yeah.
I come from a storytelling narrative background, so I think the storytelling, I mean, you even look at here in the U.S., I mean, the fact that we have issues like, I don't know, if it's the Epstein thing, suddenly if you're like, wow, that's weird, and they call you a conspiracy theorist, like right off the bat, even though we've been following this for whatever, a decade. Or if you are dealing with this border debate, suddenly immigrant is supposed to cover both illegal and legal, right? How did it become
No,
a single
it was a
word?
migrant. Yeah, we merged it into migrant.
Yeah,
Remember
so,
that?
yes.
No one talked about migrants when
But
we were
you look
growing
at the
up.
power of words, you look at the
Yeah.
power of narrative and how it tears people apart and takes different perspectives that aren't that different and make them completely polarizing, right? And then you put it in the hands of a foreign adversary and you realize, wow, it's pretty easy to win a war without ever firing a bullet.
That has my mind go to, well, like, what other foreign adversaries have the money that want to buy narrative power? And the assumption is probably all of them.
Yeah.
And I mean, Chris has done a great job explaining how China is uniquely positioned to do that. But you don't have to choose. You can be against TikTok for both of these reasons. But it is interesting that we find different things most troubling. Because I'm almost a fatalist on the narrative thing. I'm like, oh, heck, whose hands do you control the narrative in? Nobody's. Not any of these American oligarchs, not any of the foreign oligarchs either. And so all you can do is really democratize information. And then the greatest threat that faces is the elimination of platforms. And so if you're eliminating platforms, it always gets the hair on the back of my neck stood up a little bit. But you're a person who spends a lot of time thinking about the power of the narrative formation.
Yeah.
Is Chris right that is actually scarier than the data? Because I'm more scared about the data.
Well, yes, I think I'm very much someone who believes like language control is mind control. So that's why I believe in the power of narrative and all that. And I think that's important. But for me, what I think is more of an aspect to focus on is how is it that China, that, for really has like this reputation of not being able to invent anything that, they didn't steal from somebody else, essentially. How are they the ones to come up with the best app, and that turns out to be the number one source of news for young people in America? I'm a guy that believes that America leads diplomatically on the globe from a cultural aspect, but you're telling me Silicon Valley can't come up with one app for entertainment that could beat out TikTok? What are all these geniuses in Silicon Valley
It's an
doing?
amazing point, because you've seen Zuckerberg try to do it with Threads,
Yeah.
and that didn't work.
Everyone's
and even
trying-
Reels is sort of an attempt at it, but that didn't work.
Right. Yeah.
Why didn't those work, Chris?
Well, I'm not a tech expert, but it just doesn't seem as crazily addictive as TikTok.
But I have no idea why. Like, if someone asked me why TikTok worked and Reels didn't, I honestly couldn't tell you.
I think there's part of it is still like the woke stuff. I think TikTok, like, yeah, there's still censorship on all these platforms, but TikTok seems the least censorious of all the platforms. And so whatever allows the creator to make their content and be monetized in a proper way for it, that's the platform that's going to win. Again, one of the big parts about why TikTok won in this marketplace is because of the monetization, is because they were paying creators who were coming onto their platform in a competitive way.
They're still paying them the best. If you're a creator, in this kind of like short video format, there's still no platform that pays you better.
That's right.
But the platform that pays me best is One American News, which is why I'm about to do this ad read You've heard me talk about all